I'm used to talking with the beer in my hand, but I can't do that with two things here, so just have to leave it over there. I'm Rich Adamson. I'm one of the founders of Young Henry's Brewery. Where do we start? So we're going to do our sustainability journey, where Young Henry's kind of started on the journey and where we got to, and I guess the power of saying yes and where it might lead you, and where we kind of ended up in a very strange and unusual place, but we're very excited. The 17 sustainability goals. These are big, lofty goals, and I look at these as a brewer and I say, where can I have an impact here on things like no poverty, things like life on land? It's pretty big, right? You know, we're a little brewery in Newtown. And then I read about the UN Global Compact, and this is where businesses can get involved with achieving these 17 sustainability goals through 10 principles. And I was like, 10's better than 17. I'm surely we can do something here. And we look at this, and we look at what the 10 principles are. Human rights, labour standards, environment, and anti-corruption. I kind of think to myself, these are things we all should be doing, right? As business owners, these are the things that you kind of should be doing anyway. So let's go for it. So we signed as a UN, we're a signatory to the UN Global Compact. And as part of that journey too, we decided to go for B Corp certification. Now, I've got to say congratulations to the university for achieving the certification, because it is painful, isn't it? It's a painful process. There is a lot of documentation, a lot of work going through that certification, and not only that, we've got to improve on it. So it's not a static thing. So I don't know how long ago you got it, but we're looking at what we've got to do for our, to get our certification in less than a year and a half time. So it's a continual improving thing, as is being a signatory to the UN Global Compact. It's a continual process. In the middle there is the UTS, the Deep Gleam Biotech Hub, and we'll talk a little bit more about our partnership with them as we go through the slides. I wanted to sort of break down maybe how we went to try and contribute to achieving those 10 principles. And I guess one of the first things we looked at was I had a role as a director of the Independent Brewers Association, and I became the president. But one of the first things that I got involved with was putting together a code of conduct. And our industry went through a bit of a Me Too moment. There was some pretty loose behaviour out there, particularly around events, and we'd established a code of conduct in conjunction with consultation with the industry. Compliance to the law is an obvious one, but perspective of individuals and groups and taking responsibility for the management of hospitality festivals and events where most incidents of sexual assault occur. And let's take responsibility for how we market, how we manage those events, and really stand up for the people that work within our industry. That leads us, thank you. Yeah, it does lead on to our social responsibilities too. Gender diversity, gender pay gap. I was told an amazing story about a industry where they were trying to get more women into the workplace, and one of the basic fundamental things was that the men's toilet was 2 minutes away from the workplace and the female toilets were 10 minutes away from where they were working. Really basic things that you need to work on to improve. It is about making people more comfortable. Young Henry's did take a stand for the marriage equality, so we had yes buses going all the way through for our delivery buses during the time of the vote, and we thought that was important to support our gay employees who really just wanted to be part of society, and this is the one thing we could do to make a stand for them as well. And it's true, in terms of social responsibility and alcohol, we have a social license really to promote a legal drug, essentially, and make a legal drug. And we've got to take that responsibility very seriously. Truth in labelling is a big one for me, and that's really about the origin of things and not glossing over and making up stories, but being genuine about it. Responsible consumption, obviously, minimise harm, no appeal to children, and that goes to the way that you advertise and the way that you you label your products, making sure that we are looking at no to low alcohol. And really, I feel that the beer is the drink of moderation. I'm really proud to see one of our other independent breweries, Sober, represented here in the no alcohol space. And Sober, one of the alumni in terms of talking, I saw before, fantastic organisation, Indigenous owned, using native ingredients, amazing company. But beer has a good, amazing role to play in terms of, I think, the drink of moderation. And let's get rid of all this sexism around beer as well. I think beer has done itself an amazing disservice the way it's been advertised and marketed, to the exclusion of 50% of your market. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. So let's make it inclusive and let's have fun all together. And it's about bringing people together. Making beer has a lot of sustainability challenges. It's very energy intensive. We use a lot of raw materials that goes all the way back to agriculture. And in fact, in Australia, there's more land dedicated towards growing the raw materials for beer than there are wineries. I think it's a distinction we probably don't think about that much. Packing and distribution, what's the carbon footprint for that? We're big users of water too, and that's one of the sustainability goals that we have. And then CO2 production. We've got to look at mitigate and reuse. So when you look at that, young Henry was saying, well, how are we going to tackle these problems? Energy, very intensive energy users. So over 30% of the cost of beer. We have to look at our sources of energy. We're big users of natural gas and electricity. Can we generate electricity on site? Can we get renewables from the grid? First step, I think, is really just look at how you use energy. So we looked at our how we generate hot water, how we can store and reuse, and there's ways that we can do heat exchangers throughout the brewery, and you can plug that into your refrigeration, so you're using those basically as heat exchangers. Time of use is really important in terms of making sure you're not just drawing too much on the grid at one time. Having efficient equipment, and that goes down to things like just soft starting equipment so it doesn't spike. Looking at your processes and looking at your ways you can manage in a broader business sense. We were very fortunate that we got approached by a community solar group called Pingala. So this group allows people to participate in the generation of solar electricity where maybe they can't. So maybe they are renting, or maybe they live in a block of flats, or maybe they're just they've got a house that faces the wrong direction. What happened was that they put this out for shares that people could buy, shares in the solar panels that were on the roof of our brewery. They get a 6% return on their investment. We lease it from them and we get to use electricity. So it was a win-win-win in many cases. We started with the first bunch of roofs, I think maybe 7 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, we did the other side of the roof. It was sold out within, I think it was oversubscribed within 5 minutes of being available, which is fantastic. I think breweries are a great use of the solar electricity because we use electricity at the time it's being generated. And the remainder of our electricity we get from the grid via a power purchasing agreement. Water, very intensive. So for every litre of beer, we're using about 5 or 6 litres of water. So water efficiency is a really important goal. We're looking at our cleaning systems and how we can reduce water there. We put a high efficiency brewery in. So this is really big brewery technology on a small scale. So we use a lot less water, we use a lot less grain. So we're reducing our environmental impact, but it saves money. And I think when we talk about sustainability goals and we link it to finance, we link it to industry, we link it to saving money, that's where we really can make an impact and people will take it on. Now, they're all very basic things we do. However, I'd like to pose a question. What if drinking beer did something really positive for the planet? So the questions are why. Now, we heard from Kat about Scope 3 emissions reporting, and I'm sure all of you CPAs over here are probably freaking about what that's going to mean in the future. It's going to be a lot of work for you. We're also facing one of the biggest challenges and opportunities in our lifetime, and I think we really need to focus on the opportunity side, because whenever there's transition, wherever there's change, there's going to be opportunity, and there's going to be opportunity for new industries to emerge. And brewers, we're right in the middle of an agricultural supply chain. The brewing industry faces a really interesting CO2 contradiction. So when we make beer, and if there's any home brewers in the room or just scientists in the room, fermentation produces CO2. Most of that goes to waste. But CO2 is actually a supply risk at the moment and facing volatile pricing. So we're in this very weird situation where we've got too much CO2 in atmosphere, but not enough for industry. And it's not just brewing that's having this problem, it's pretty much every type of food packaging industry in Australia. It was such that we actually had force majeure events within contract manufacturers who couldn't finish jobs because they couldn't get CO2. This is kind of crazy, right? So when I say brewing is in the middle of in the agricultural supply chain, malted barley makes beer, and then our waste product, our spent grain, goes back to the farm in the form of cattle feed. So we thought this: what if we could capture our CO2 and reuse it within the brewing process, at the same time install algae bioreactors alongside these CO2 capture systems, and we grow that algae and we put that with our spent grain, and then that spent grain can reduce methane emissions in cows. That's a pretty weird bunch of connections, I think you're thinking, right? Where did you come up with this idea? So when we first met with UTS, they showed us around the climate change cluster, which is multidisciplinary faculty looking at how they solve problems with climate change for industry. And I was fascinated by these glowing green tanks of algae. And the language they were using was very similar to brewing. You know, they're talking about sparging, talking about pH, they're talking about single cell growth. But what was interesting is it kind of does the opposite thing to yeast. So yeast is producing CO2 and alcohol, and algae is taking in CO2 and producing sugar through photosynthesis. So I thought, what happens if we could put these two things in balance? We could take in the CO2 from fermentation and grow algae. Now the obvious question then is, what are you going to do with the algae? There's a bunch of different ways we could use this. It could be used for petrochemical replacement in terms of plastics. It can be used for growing pharmaceuticals. It can be used for treating wastewater. But also we know about the work the CSR has been doing with red algae, form of cattle feed supplements, and only 1% of cattle feed is needed to reduce methane production in cattle by 80%. That's pretty incredible, right? And we know that methane is 80% CO2 in terms of the global greenhouse gas, in terms of its impact it's going to have. It doesn't stay around as long as CO2, but it has about a 100-year lifespan. If we want to solve the problems that we're facing now, if we want to keep within 1.5, I hope it's 1.5, I'm thinking 2, we've got to solve the methane problem. So where we're at, we've been trialling this in the brewery now for 6 years and grow algae successfully in a brewery. We've found strains of algae that is highly CO2 tolerant and relatively stable in the brewing environment, and brewers can grow it. We have also just completed live animal trials jointly funded by the Meat and Livestock Australia. So we fed 70 head of lamb our cattle feed at 1%, and I'll tell you a little about the success we had with that. We have a provisional patent on the methodology, and we have expressions of interest around the world about how we can implement this technology. Which leads us to 3 statements you'd never think you would ever see together. Drink beer, eat steak, save the planet. Now, why are you going to eat the meat that has fed the algae? Well, you may do this because you're environmentally conscious. We know that Around 12% of Australians are now vegan, and they're choosing not to eat red meat. And in the 18 to 24-year-old group, about 50% of those people are doing that purely on environmental reasons. So red meat's got an image problem, right? If you could choose red meat that you know is not producing the methane, maybe you will. But what we found in that live animal trial was we did a sensory analysis. So we had a panel of people try the lamb that was fed the algae versus the ones that weren't, and they found a difference, which scared the shit out of me, to be honest. However, they preferred it. So not only is it better for the environment, it tastes better. And we believe that's because it's got a higher omega-3 content. So can we produce a healthier meat that's tastier and more environmentally conscious? That's where we're heading. So what we want to see is beer positive. And you like that name rather than the green algae stuff? It's beer positive. As a trademark, as a mark, just like B Corp is, the breweries could use if they adopt this technology. We also have beef positive as well. We have vino positive and we have grain positive. Because the other use of the algae is as biostimulant and fertiliser. So wineries could grow algae they could put straight onto their crops and replace inorganic fertiliser. Malting facilities that grow grain that is used for barley, which makes the beer, can also do the same thing. And the malting process actually generates CO2 because when the grain is going through the malting process, it respires before it photosynthesizes. Respiring produces CO2. So we have these multiple uses, and beyond food, we're thinking any CO2 emitting industry can turn that CO2 into an algae that could do something positive for the environment. And this is where it gets really exciting. So you think of really big CO2 emitting industries with a whole bunch of bioreactors on the back, growing something like a fertiliser, growing something like a cattle feed, growing something like a petrochemical plastic replacement. Now we're talking about a real circular economy. And I think that's really something we should be seeking. That's it, my friend.
Thank you. I thought they were just clapping your good sentiment, let alone the end. Richard, thank you. So, no, leave that there. I'll sort that out. Oh, drink beer, eat meat, save the planet. We need that on like bumper stickers on e-vehicles everywhere. Hey, Richard, just between you and I, they're from the Chartered Accounts of Australia, not CBA. It's like me calling your beer Tuies. That's all right. We'll get the video.